Would it really help if you added yourself to the stream, Sam, wouldn't it? I was sitting there going, I'm ready for the video to end. I'm going to be on screen. I didn't bring myself on. Hello, how are you doing? Now you can tell how I'm feeling today. My name is Sam Langford. Welcome to Going Live with the Global Science Show. I'm the founder and coordinator of the Global Science Show, the monthly virtual science festival that invites science communicators from all around the world to share a little bit of their own science, something they're really interested in, with a global audience. Today, we're here for another cuppa. This is probably cup number 3 for me of coffee today. For a half-hour chat with another science communicator. We're going to ask them who they are, what they do, and what makes them awesome. We'll be here for about half an hour. That time will go very, very quickly. Thank you to those people already watching. Thank you for joining us. And if you're watching back later, hi again, and thank you so much for watching. You can ask us any questions, whether that's on Twitter. If you're watching YouTube, you might be on Twitch. I doubt you're on Twitch, but you might be. But yeah, ask us any questions if you want to join in the conversation. Today, we have an awesome guest for you. We're going to talk about what makes them really, really cool. So we'll get them in without any further ado. Welcome to Nuzhat Tabassum.
Hey.
Hello.
How are you?
Oh, as I was saying, and we talked about this before, is that like coffee is keeping me going today, and I've realised why I'm feeling quite like on edge with it is that it's not instant coffee today. I've got the fancier stuff, which is really strong, really strong. But it's Thursday, so I think I need it in order to get through to the end. How are you doing?
I am good. I'm not a coffee drinker, but I have a bowl of pineapple if anyone is interested.
That makes me feel bad that I haven't yet had any. But that's like a nice way to be like starting lunchtime, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna start with what we always do and ask, who are you and what do you do?
Okay, so as Sam's already mentioned, I'm Nuzhat Tabassum. I come from a natural science background. So I did natural sciences for my undergrad because I loved all the sciences. I couldn't choose. But in the end, I became more and more interested in earth sciences. And I had this fascination from everything to do with volcanoes to the mantle. So I knew I wanted to do a PhD, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do it in. So I did an internship in Colima, Mexico, where I worked in a volcano observatory at a university for a few months. And ultimately, I realized actually I wanted to study the mantle more. So I did a PhD at Bristol University where I studied trapped mineral inclusions in diamonds for just to see what they can tell us about what's happening hundreds of kilometers below our feet. But the more I did my PhD and the more I was climbing up academia, I was more interested in like the link between science and society. And ultimately, I wanted to work for a while in an area where I could improve access to STEM education. So currently, I'm an education policy assistant at the Royal Academy of Engineering. And right now I'm working on a project where it's looking at the impacts of socioeconomic background and pathways into STEM education and engineering.
That is some pretty, like, I didn't know that you'd spent like a bunch of time like in Mexico. Like that's really, really cool.
Like 3 months there, I loved it. I loved working with a team there. Like we had an international team, but also just that was the first time I saw an active volcano. Despite like wanting to study volcanoes like for quite a while, that was the first time I got to see an active volcano and like live next to it, work on it, and yeah, it was really fun.
Oh God, like I don't think I will ever see a volcano. Like that's one of those things that I don't think I'll ever get the chance to do. Like so I can't imagine get to like actually spend a whole bunch of time working there. Oh, what an experience. And then like studying diamonds. Like that's like what was that about? What were you looking to find out?
So, like, during the end of my undergraduate, there was this really fascinating paper that came out. So, for example, we know or we have an idea of what the Earth's interior looks like through non-direct observation. So we know there's like an inner core, outer core, a mantle through like seismic data and um, pits of the mantle that comes from like volcanic eruptions, but we can't really study it directly. So but also we have an idea of what the Earth's interior looks like from experiments. So we have an idea of what it might look like. So in 2014, this paper came out where like there was a diamond with a ringwoodite trapped inside, and ringwoodite was one of the minerals that was proposed existed within the mantle, but we had no like direct evidence of it. And this diamond was the first instance where we had a terrestrial ringwoodite. It kind of basically proved a lot of experimental ideas that were produced. So that showed me the potential that diamonds had to like be able to study the Earth's interior. So when I was applying for PhDs, I applied for a couple of ones, but there was one that was like, we're going to use diamonds to understand the volatile cycle of the solid Earth. So I was like, okay, I've seen what it's been able to do. I think we could do more with diamonds. So I was really excited and I applied and I got it. And I think like diamonds are complicated, right? Like it's valued in terms of its jewelry use, but I think diamonds are underrated by geologists. I think there's so much potential. So I really enjoyed studying like the way that diamonds are able to tell us a lot about the Earth's interior.
I would never have really, like, again, I because of like how we view the mainstream as they're part of jewelry, and that's where most people know diamonds from. Maybe people know about them being used in kind of like cutting processes because they're really hard. But I wouldn't have ever really thought that it could tell us more about the makeup of like the Earth. So that's like absolutely amazing. And then like currently you said you're working with the Royal Academy of Engineering. So could you go into a wee bit more about what it is you're doing with them?
So like the Royal Academy of Engineering it's expanded a lot in I'd say like the last 5 years or so. So I'm part of the education policy team. So it's a lot about, they do a lot of different things. So there's a lot of work on, for example, there's one project on looking at sustainability in engineering education, ethics in engineering education. But when I joined, like me and my line manager were talking about things that we're interested in terms of education. Just both of us were interested in making STEM engineering education more accessible, looking at what the barriers there are, because like ultimately in the engineering workforce, there is an underrepresentation of people from a lower socioeconomic background, but there isn't really a clear idea of what the disparity is, like where it happens and how it happens. So I'm leading on a project where we're basically trying to study this. We're trying to highlight the barriers in engineering education. And in terms of this, I'm trying to approach this in an intersectional manner. So, lower socioeconomic background relates to a lot of things. It can relate to and it can intersect with different things as well. So it can intersect with your ethnicity. It can intersect with regional area you're from, if you have special education needs. So I'm trying to see like how your background impacts like what your access to education, STEM education, ultimately pursuing an engineering career.
And is that looking across like different levels of education? So from kind of like primary school up to higher
from primary ultimately and up to degrees and apprenticeship. So trying to see the disparities in every level of your education.
And that's going to really vary, isn't it? Like across a nation like the UK, where we are, like because of the different educational systems within
Exactly.
4 different countries as well. Because you got in touch with me like over a year. Was it over a year ago? Now? Like, maybe
No,
like a year
it'd
ago
be
now.
less than a year ago.
Oh, was
I
it?
just passed my probation period a few weeks ago. So it would have been in the last 6 months, I think, I
Oh, right.
contacted you about it. Because
No, time doesn't mean anything.
I think like a lot of these projects especially do have a focus on England. But obviously, you know, these barriers aren't restricted to England. It exists throughout the country. So I'm trying to, one of my challenge is trying to understand the different educational systems within, like, for example, Scotland. So I don't want to leave any part of the country out, basically.
And that's a difficult job, because even when the people that work in education in each of these different regions of the UK don't understand their own curriculum as well, because it's quite difficult. But like a really valuable project, like a really cool thing to be doing. So I'm going to follow and see what comes out of it, because that sounds like it's going to be incredibly valuable for everybody involved. So what a way to be doing it. So that's like, you've been doing that for the past couple of months. But the pandemic has been going on for longer than that. So my next question I ask is, how have you spent your pandemic? What have you been up to?
So I might be speaking from a point of privilege here because, and I accept that, because the pandemic for me has been a period where I've been trying to heal. So I think I speak about it on my Twitter, but the last few years of my PhD, I underwent was really tough on me, particularly because there were many reasons, but one of the reasons was there were negative experiences with certain people who are trying to go out of their way to make my PhD hard for me. So the last few years of my PhD were quite suffocating. And the pandemic made it even hard because I finished my PhD before the pandemic, and I passed my Viva. And the thing is, because my PhD became so difficult, the period was so difficult, I put a lot of things on hold. So a lot of things I wanted to pursue, a lot of interests I had, I put it on hold. I said that once it's done, I'm going to pursue it. And then one of those things I put on hold was traveling. So after I passed my Viva, I went traveling, which was cut short during because of the pandemic, understandably. And so the beginning of the pandemic was really hard for me because I was coming out of this really negative period of my life. I was trying to pursue something that I loved, but that got cut short. So the beginning of the pandemic was me reflecting how hard it was. And I felt like I was putting my life still on limbo because of the pandemic. So it was really hard. And I was struggling with unemployment as well, because it was the worst time to go into job hunting. And so it was really tough. There was a lot of self-reflecting, a lot of support I needed from my friends. And there's a writing group that, I'm shouting out to, who've helped me through it a lot. And people like Rahmat, who have been really supportive. But then I was lucky enough to get a job in something that I really cared about. So being able to have a job in education policy, I was fortunate because I loved doing science and I loved the project I was doing during my PhD, but I wasn't able to love my PhD because of those negative experiences. So it was to the point where I wasn't looking forward to coming into the office. I wasn't looking forward to doing the work, but being able to do a job that I cared something about was it was me on the way to recovery, basically, because I was looking forward to my Mondays, and I'm lucky to work in an organization where everybody so far has been so lovely, and my line manager is very supportive. I feel like I'm gaining the confidence that I lost. I feel like almost a normal person again, because I like going to these these tea breaks that we have and these events. So the pandemic, I've been mostly recovering from the burnout, the exhaustion, and what I feel like depression that the end of my PhD gave me. So I've been recovering. But another thing I've been doing during my pandemic is doing what I loved before are like doing things that I wanted to do during my PhD, but I put on hold. So some of this included like I've been taking language classes. So I've been learning Spanish during the pandemic. I've been learning how to read and write in Bangla during the pandemic. That's important for me because when you're in a limbo, you have to find what makes you happy. And for me, growing, like seeing progress makes me happy. So even though like a lot of my day is like the same, seeing my language skills grow, being able to read and write in Bangla and being able to speak more like have discussions in Spanish has let me feel like I'm growing, and it gives me that like daily dose of happiness basically. But another thing that I've been doing during the pandemic is like pursuing the projects that I've wanted to during my PhD. And one of them is the What on Earth podcast that me and Jasmine have been trying to do since 2018. And another thing I've been doing is that I've been trying to see which voluntary organizations I want to put my time into. So I'm like a critical friend of Science London, which is about improving science improving equity in science communication. So those are the couple of things that I've been up to.
It's a lot, really, like, but like a good amount. It's really good to hear that you've kind of got into that point of things like using this time to be able to recover and get to a place where like you are happy to go to work in the morning, because like for so many people that is just not something that they can face, and like the pandemic made that even harder. So like really fab to hear that that's like a place that you're at now. And also don't want to dive too much into this because we don't have a lot of time left, but we could probably talk about it for like an hour. But seems to happen to so many PhD students that and especially women, and especially women of color, who are PhD students, that they end up in this position where they don't feel valued, or they feel like it's not been a nice experience for them. So I'm really, really happy to see that like you've come out of that and you're at the other end of feeling more positive about the work you're doing and the projects you're working on. And why Spanish? No, that's a question I'm going to ask.
So when I was traveling prior to the pandemic, I was traveling around Cuba, Colombia, and the plan was to go to Argentina. So one of the reasons I pursued Spanish first was because I want to be able to travel more independently and travel in such a way that I can get to learn the culture and be able to communicate and get to know the locals a lot more. So when I was traveling, I didn't know a lot of Spanish, and I felt kind of sad that I wasn't being able to like integrate as much while I was traveling. So Spanish was a priority. I would love, obviously, I'd love to be a polyglot and learn as much language as possible. But I think, yeah, that was a priority of Spanish so far. And I love it. It's really fun. I like the way it sounds. And yeah, it's been great.
Awesome. I'm also going to add that at the bottom. So that is the link on Apple for people to check out the podcast. I'm going to ask about the podcast because we've got Jasmine's coming on next week to chat to us as well. What do you discuss in the What on Earth podcast?
So the reason that we created What on Earth podcast was like on social media, I was getting to know so many great scientists, especially so many great scientists from minority backgrounds. But one thing I found kind of sad was that, like, I think when you're a minority, especially when you care a lot about improving equity in science, you spend a lot of your time talking about how to improve science rather than being able to communicate your own science. And you get pigeonholed as the go-to person to talk about race within your department or within your research group. And I was thinking, like, I think this is the privilege of being a white person in science, because you get to be known for the science that you do as opposed to what research you do. So there are so many great people I met, like Mike Rivera or like Rehemat Bhatia. When I first met her, like I knew them because of the love they had in making science accessible, but I knew so little about what research they did. And I was like, we need a platform where they get to talk about the science that they love, the STEM that they love. We need to promote what they've been doing. And so we want to create this platform so that they could just, have this platform where they could just talk about their research, the love of their research, how they got into it. Just to see the joy in talking about what they do, or like how they got into it. But also we wanted to give a platform for them to talk about any kind of great ideas that they had, or any frustrations they had about the STEM community. So they had this like platform to talk about it uninterrupted. So whenever we speak to our guests beforehand, we're like, what do you want to use this platform to talk about? So ultimately we let them kind of frame the conversation as much as possible.
I've really enjoyed listening to it. I listened to one with Michael recently, and he's just such a great person to get like his insight into the world of STEM, and and just and anthropology as well. Really, really great. And you mentioned Rahema, and I know that they're watching right now. So hi. And they posted.
Hey, Rahema, I love you.
So, and I've not listened to the one with Craig yet, like Craig Polke, who is just an absolute delight. Who's your most recent? Because Craig's not the most recent episode, is it?
Oh, Itati Santa Maria is our latest guest, and their podcast, like every guest we've had, it has been amazing. So with the Tati, we get into talking about restoration ecology, but also we talk about decolonizing from the perspective of a Mexicana American. So their perspective on decolonizing science.
Awesome. And that's out now, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's now, as they call it, the conversation gets a little spicy.
I'm definitely going to have to check it out. Right, we're fast running out of time, so I'm going to move on. But I'll leave that there in case people want to check out the podcast, and why wouldn't they? A few weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, it was International Women and Girls in Science Day. And the Global Science Show had a day of people talking about role models that they have in STEM. And you did something slightly different. You talked about how you perhaps didn't have a role model in science. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Of course. So one of the things that happens in science communication research, and for my project, what I've been learning more about is the way that students can identify as a scientist. And one of the things that made me realize about my childhood was that, from a young age, I was really good at science and I was really good at maths. I had the best grades. And it's something that I really enjoyed doing. But no matter how much and how great I was, I never considered being a scientist. Like, I knew I wanted to do a PhD from a young age, but I never thought, okay, and then I'll be a scientist. And I was just thinking, like, why is that? And one of the reasons is that the way we perceive the world, what we see, is so powerful in shaping how we shape our potential, or the way we shape our aspirations. Like, it doesn't matter what your potential is. It doesn't matter what your potential is. We are shaped by what we see. And so one of the things that made me not even consider science as a career was that I was never able to see someone I relate to become or being a scientist. My books were filled with mostly white men, possibly most likely middle class, most likely straight men. And it's because you're filled with those images that science and scientists are seen as a completely different bubble. It's so hard to articulate that, because it seemed like a whole different world. I wasn't able to bridge my world to the bubble of science. And even at university, even though I was studying natural sciences, I just couldn't see myself as a scientist. And that's because even when I went to um, university, like I didn't really have a professor that I could relate to. A majority of the professors in earth sciences, but also like the wider science community still continue to be mostly like white men or like white women. If you have any diversity. So it just seems like a community that's really inaccessible to you. And it's just, if you can't see it, you can't visualize it for yourself. And it's so hard to articulate this to people who perhaps don't empathize with it.
Yeah, it's a really valuable perspective, I think,
Mm-hmm.
for us to all listen to and to all take on
Mm-hmm.
board, especially in the science communication world.
Mm-hmm. Like, even though my parents were trying to get me to aspire to being like an engineer or like a doctor, all majority of like all my aunts and like my mom, they were housewives at that time, so they didn't want the same like career path. They didn't want us to aspire to be a housewife. They wanted us to have high aspirations, but even though they were pushing us to be ambitious, I still, there was a one point in my life I was like, well, this is my fate. Most South Asian women just turn out to be housewives. But it's not just sciences. Like when I was growing up, I rarely saw any like British Bangladeshi role models. There was only one, Connie Hawk, which was great to see one, but then that's one is never enough.
No. When you can say, "Oh yeah, Connie's the person that I
Mm-hmm.
can visualize that." Whereas if I was to say, "What white men could I name that
Mm-hmm.
represented me?" I could sit here for half an hour listing off names, and that's
Mm-hmm.
not good enough. Like it really isn't.
Mm-hmm. I read one research and I went to a talk about it where they looked at British Bangladeshi girls in STEM, and they were saying like when they interviewed girls, they would say they wanted to be like a hairdresser or they want to be a midwife, and it's mostly because like the women they related to were going into those roles, and they asked them, oh, what about scientists? And they were like, oh, I don't know anyone, even if they were interested in STEM, they just wouldn't consider it because it just wasn't reachable to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it continues to be when we do have any of these kind of profiles of like women in STEM.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw one today, and there was 20 women represented, and only one of them was a woman. Like it was one black woman, and
Mm-hmm.
no other women of color from
Mm-hmm.
like other ethnicities. We need to stop doing it. It needs to stop happening. It's so easy for people to just take a moment and think about who you're representing and why there's not other people at the table.
I think also when it comes to role models, I think it's very easy for organizations to say like, that's the solution, role models. But having role models from different backgrounds, it's the organization's role to think about why do we not have it? What do we change in our organization to let people from minority backgrounds thrive? So when I say we need more role models, well, I'm saying that organizations need to check up on like why people don't feel like they can work in their organization. What kind of policies do you have to make sure there's no bullying, harassment? How are you checking that there's no bias, that people from minority backgrounds are not valued as equally? Saying role models, it's not actually picking out a person, making them become a role model. It's about addressing the culture of your workplace and like your sector. It's about the whole community.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Science communication's really bad for it as well. Like that kind of tick box we've done, like just like wipe your hands. That is half past, or just about half past.
That went really quick.
Yeah, we didn't even get to all the things that I was like going to talk about, but like that shows a good we've managed to cover a lot. So thank you so much for coming and having a chat with us.
Thank you for inviting me, Sam.
No, it was really good to have you here. So you've got your Twitter account, and alongside your name. Is that the best place for people to find out more about you and what you're up to?
Yeah, my Twitter is the best place. I have Insta, which you can contact me. It's again the same handle. I'm still in the process of making a website. I need to get on that, but Twitter and Insta are the best places to contact me.
I know the pain of having to put together a website. It takes a lot of time. Thank you so much again. And I'm going to use the power that I have. Always enjoy this to say goodbye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Another half an hour gone really quickly. Thank you so much again for those of you who've been watching. There's been quite a few of you. We've had some retweets and comments of people watching, people taking photographs of the screen. Lovely to see my own face on someone else's screen. It's not. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to Nuzhat for being here to have a conversation with us. We'll be back again on Tuesday next week with Dr. Emma Wynell, and then on Thursday next week with the other half of the What on Earth podcast, we'll have Dr. Jasmine Scarlett. So in the meantime, have a lovely weekend, take care, and we'll see you all very soon.